The crystalline spires of Drakmor stretched toward three purple suns, their surfaces gleaming with the pride of an ancient civilization. In the highest tower of the royal palace, Lord Zephyros paced across marble floors that had witnessed 1,000 years of dragon nobility. His massive claws clicked against the stone with each frustrated step, golden scales shimmering with barely contained rage. Before him lay his greatest shame, a small dragon hatchling no bigger than a house cat, struggling pathetically on a silk cushion. The creature's wings, translucent and delicate, fluttered uselessly as he attempted to lift himself. His legs, though perfectly formed, trembled and collapsed under his own weight. "Useless," Zephyros growled, his voice rumbling through the chamber like distant thunder. 3 months old and still cannot stand properly, let alone fly. The bloodline of the Skylords has produced a cripple. The hatchling, Ember as the servants had secretly named him, let out a soft whimper. His amber eyes, intelligent and aware, followed his father's movements with desperate hope for approval that never came. Where other dragon young soared through palace halls within weeks of hatching, Ember could barely crawl across his cushioned prison. "My lord," ventured Chancellor Mordak, an elderly dragon whose own scales had dulled to bronze with age. "Perhaps the healers could." "The healers have done all they can," Zephyros snapped. "They speak of underdeveloped muscle structures, weak bones, genetic anomalies. In the old days, such weakness would have been left on the mountain peaks for the wind spirits to claim." Through the vast windows, other young dragons could be seen practicing aerial maneuvers above the city. Their joyful roars echoed across the valley as they dove and soared in perfect formations. Ember watched them with longing, his small body trembling with effort as he tried once more to spread his wings. The palace staff had learned to speak in whispers around the royal heir. Servants hurried past the heir's chambers with downcast eyes, afraid to witness another failed attempt at flight. The kitchen maids prepared special soft foods that wouldn't require strong jaws to consume. Even the guards, mighty dragon warriors who had conquered star systems, looked away in pity when they saw the struggling hatchling. But among the palace staff was someone different, someone who didn't belong to this world of scaled nobility and ancient bloodlines. Sarah Chen had arrived on Drakmor 6 months earlier as part of a diplomatic exchange program between Earth and the Dragon Consortium. At 25, she was a physical therapist who had volunteered for the position, thinking she would be treating injured dragon warriors, not witnessing the quiet tragedy of a disabled heir. Sarah had been assigned quarters in the servants' wing, far from the royal family's private chambers. The other human diplomats lived in the embassy district, but Sarah's role as a medical professional placed her in an awkward middle ground. Too valuable to dismiss, but too foreign to truly trust with sensitive matters. She had first glimpsed Ember during her 3rd week on Drakmor. While delivering medical supplies to the palace's main infirmary, she had taken a wrong turn through the endless corridors. The soft sound of distressed chirping had drawn her attention to a partially open door. Inside, she saw the small dragon struggling on his cushion, tiny claws scrabbling for purchase on the smooth silk. His wings beat frantically, creating pathetic little gusts of air that barely stirred the fabric around him. The sight reminded her of premature birds she had once helped rehabilitate, all the instinct and desire to fly, trapped in a body that wasn't ready. A sharp bark from a passing guard had sent her scurrying back to the infirmary, but the image haunted her dreams. In the days that followed, she found herself taking that same wrong turn, spending a few precious moments watching the hatchling's determined struggles. Sarah's own background was far removed from the grandeur of dragon society. She had grown up in a small town in Oregon, the daughter of a nurse and a mechanic. Her childhood had been filled with injured animals. Birds with broken wings, cats with damaged spines, dogs recovering from surgery. Her parents had encouraged her natural empathy, and she had chosen physical therapy as a career specifically to help those whom others might write off as hopeless cases. The dragons of Drakmor prided themselves on strength and perfection. Their society had no place for weakness, no understanding of rehabilitation or adaptive techniques. What they saw as irreversible failure, Sarah recognized as a challenge that could potentially be overcome with patience and proper technique. As days turned into weeks, Ember's condition seemed to worsen. The stress of constant failure was taking its toll on the young dragon's spirit. He spent longer periods lying motionless on his cushion, his amber eyes losing their bright curiosity. The palace healers spoke in hushed tones about the hatchling's declining will to live. Lord Zephyros's visits became shorter and more infrequent. The sight of his disabled son clearly caused him pain that he expressed as anger. Plans were being made, Sarah overheard, to send Ember to a remote monastery where he could live out his days in quiet seclusion, away from the expectations of royal life. But fate would intervene in the form of a simple accident. While carrying medical supplies through the palace corridors one evening, Sarah slipped on a newly polished section of floor. The crash echoed through the halls as bottles and bandages scattered across the marble. As she scrambled to collect the spilled supplies, she realized she was directly outside Ember's chamber. The door, which had been slightly ajar, swung open fully from the vibration of her fall. Inside, Ember lifted his head weakly, his amber eyes meeting Sarah's brown ones for the first time. In that moment, something passed between human and dragon. A recognition of kindred spirits facing seemingly impossible odds. Sarah glanced around quickly, ensuring no guards were approaching. The corridor was empty, the evening shift change providing a brief window of opportunity. She gathered her scattered supplies and, after a moment's hesitation, slipped quietly into Ember's chamber. The hatchling watched her approach with curiosity rather than fear. Sarah knelt beside his cushion, her trained eyes immediately assessing his condition with professional detachment. She had worked with children who had cerebral palsy, adults recovering from strokes, patients with muscular dystrophy. What she saw in Ember was not hopeless weakness, but untrained potential waiting for the right guidance. Sarah's hands trembled as she extended them toward the small dragon. Ember's scales felt warm and surprisingly soft, like heated silk rather than the cold armor she had expected. The hatchling didn't recoil from her touch. Instead, he seemed to relax for the first time since she had been observing him. "Hello there, little one," she whispered in English, then switched to the formal dragon tongue she had been learning. "I want to help you." Ember's response was a soft trill, a sound that conveyed both hope and exhaustion. Sarah's trained fingers explored his wing joints, feeling for structural abnormalities. What she discovered wasn't damage or deformity, it was simply underdevelopment. His muscles were weak from lack of proper exercise, his coordination poor from never having been taught how to move correctly. The sound of approaching footsteps forced Sarah to retreat quickly. She gathered her supplies and slipped out of the chamber just as a servant rounded the corner. But the seed of an idea had been planted. That night she lay awake in her small quarters, her mind racing with possibilities. In her years of practice, Sarah had developed techniques for helping patients overcome what others deemed impossible barriers. She had worked with children who had been told they would never walk, helping them take their first steps through patience and gradual strengthening exercises. She had guided stroke victims back to independence through careful muscle retraining and adaptive strategies. The dragon's approach to Ember's condition was to simply accept it as permanent. But Sarah understood that bodies, even dragon bodies, could be trained to overcome their limitations. 3 days later, she made her decision. During the quiet hours before dawn, when the palace staff was minimal and the royal family slept, Sarah began what she would later think of as the most important work of her career. She entered Ember's chamber with a small bag of supplies she had carefully gathered, soft cloths that wouldn't irritate his scales, small weights fashioned from decorative stones, and, most importantly, a collection of treats she had convinced the kitchen staff to prepare, tiny portions of the sweetened fish that dragon hatchlings loved. "We're going to start slowly," she told Ember, who watched her preparations with growing interest. "First, we need to build your strength." Sarah began with the most basic exercises, gentle movements that encouraged Ember to use muscles that had been dormant. She supported his body weight while encouraging him to extend his legs, helping him understand how balance should feel. Each small success was rewarded with praise and treats, positive reinforcement that was entirely foreign to dragon child rearing, but incredibly effective. The sessions had to remain secret. Dragon society would not understand a lowly human presuming to train a member of the royal family. Worse, if Lord Zephyros discovered that his son was receiving help from an alien, it might be seen as an insult to dragon superiority, the implication that their own methods were insufficient. Sarah developed an elaborate schedule to avoid detection. She learned the patterns of palace guards, the timing of servant rotations, the habits of the royal family. She memorized which corridors echoed footsteps and which provided silent passage. Her sessions with Ember became a carefully choreographed dance of secrecy. Ember proved to be an eager student. His intelligence, which had been overlooked due to his physical limitations, became apparent as he quickly learned to anticipate Sarah's exercises. He understood cause and effect, that certain movements would strengthen specific muscles, that practice would improve his coordination. Most importantly, he began to trust that improvement was possible. The first major breakthrough came 3 weeks into their secret training. Sarah had been working with Ember on basic standing exercises, supporting his weight while encouraging him to bear load on his legs. On this particular morning, as she gradually reduced her assistance, Ember suddenly stood on his own for nearly 10 seconds, before carefully lowering himself back to his cushion. "Yes," Sarah whispered excitedly, forgetting the need for silence. Ember's eyes brightened with pride and determination. For the first time since hatching, he had achieved something that resembled normal dragon development, but their celebration was interrupted by the sound of approaching voices in the corridor. Sarah quickly gathered her supplies and helped position Ember back into his usual resting pose. She was barely hidden behind a tapestry when Lord Zephyros entered with Chancellor Mordak. "Has there been any change?" Zephyros asked, though his tone suggested he expected the answer to be negative. "The healers report no improvement, my lord," Mordak replied. "If anything, they believe his condition may be stabilizing at this unfortunately low level." Sarah watched from her hiding place as Zephyros approached his son. Ember, following some instinct that Sarah couldn't understand, made no attempt to demonstrate his newfound ability. Instead, he lay as motionless as always, his eyes dim and unfocused. "Perhaps it is time to make the final arrangements," Zephyros said heavily. "The Monastery of Silent Wings has agreed to accept him. The journey could be arranged within the month." Sarah's heart clenched. A monastery meant isolation, the end of any possibility for continued improvement. But she also understood Ember's wisdom in hiding his progress. Premature revelation could lead to interference or worse, separation from his teacher. After the royal party departed, Sarah emerged from hiding to find Ember watching her with what she could only interpret as conspiratorial intelligence. He understood the need for secrecy as well as she did. "Smart boy," she murmured, offering him a treat. "We have to be very careful." The training intensified. Sarah introduced more complex exercises, working on coordination and balance. She taught Ember how to strengthen his wing muscles through resistance exercises, using her own hands to provide controlled opposition to his movements. She showed him breathing techniques that would improve his lung capacity and help him develop the controlled airflow necessary for eventual flight. Each session brought new progress. Ember's standing time increased. His leg movements became more coordinated. His wings began to show the muscle definition that had been entirely absent before. Most importantly, his confidence grew. The defeated hatchling was being replaced by a determined young dragon who believed in his own potential. Sarah found herself looking forward to their secret meetings with an intensity that surprised her. This wasn't just professional satisfaction. She was genuinely attached to the brave little dragon who worked so hard despite every obstacle. His determination reminded her why she had chosen her profession in the first place, but their secret was becoming harder to maintain. Ember's improved appetite and better mood were being noticed by the servants who tended to him. His increased alertness couldn't be hidden from the palace healers who made their routine checks. Most concerning of all, there were rumors that Lord Zephyros was planning to make a final evaluation of his son's condition before confirming the monastery arrangements. Time was running out. If Ember was going to reveal his capabilities, it would have to be soon. But Sarah knew that a partial demonstration wouldn't be enough. Dragon society respected only complete success, not gradual improvement. Ember would need to achieve something truly spectacular to change his father's mind. The question was whether they could accomplish the impossible before it was too late. 6 weeks into their clandestine training, Sarah knew they needed a breakthrough. Ember could now stand for several minutes, walk short distances, and even manage brief hops. But walking was not enough to save him from exile. In dragon society, a royal heir who could not fly was still considered fundamentally flawed. The challenge seemed impossible. Flight required not just muscle strength, but precise coordination, perfect timing, and an understanding of aerodynamics that even Earth scientists were still studying. Dragons instinctively knew how to manipulate air currents, how to angle their wings for maximum lift, how to control their descent. These skills were supposed to be genetic, hardwired into their brains from birth. But Sarah had studied biomechanics. She understood the principles of flight from a scientific perspective that complemented the dragon's instinctive knowledge. Where Ember lacked natural programming, she could provide analytical understanding. Flying isn't magic, she explained to Ember during one of their sessions, using a mixture of dragon tongue and gestures to convey complex concepts. It's physics. Your wings create lift by moving air. The shape of your wing, the angle of attack, the speed of movement, all of these can be learned and practiced. She had fashioned crude models from Palace, materials, pieces of fabric stretched between thin wooden frames to demonstrate wing shapes and airflow. Ember watched with fascination as Sarah showed him how changing the angle of the model affected its movement through the air. "See how the air moves differently when I tilt it like this?" Sarah demonstrated, moving the model through various positions. "Your wings work the same way. We just need to teach your muscles to remember these positions." The breakthrough in understanding came when Sarah realized that Ember's wing muscles were developing unevenly. His powerful downstroke muscles, those responsible for generating lift, were growing strong. But his precise control muscles, the smaller ones that handled fine adjustments and steering, remained weak. She developed new exercises specifically targeting these smaller muscle groups. Using her fingers to provide resistance, she guided Ember through thousands of tiny wing adjustments, teaching him conscious control over movements that other dragons performed automatically. Progress accelerated dramatically. Within days, Ember was achieving controlled gliding from elevated positions in his chamber. Sarah would lift him onto his sleeping platform, then guide him through the wing positions necessary for a safe descent to his cushion. Each attempt was slightly more controlled than the last, but gliding wasn't true flight. For that, Ember would need to generate enough lift to overcome gravity, something that required perfect timing, maximum power, and no small amount of courage. The palace's training grounds provided the opportunity they needed. Each night after the regular sessions with young dragons concluded, the vast chamber stood empty. Sarah had discovered a service entrance that allowed her to bring Ember to this space unobserved. The first time Ember saw the training grounds, his reaction was pure longing. The chamber was enormous, with a ceiling that disappeared into shadows far overhead. Launching platforms at various heights allowed young dragons to practice increasingly challenging flights. The walls were padded with soft materials to cushion inevitable crashes. "This is where you belong," Sarah told him softly. "Not hidden in a chamber, not exiled to a monastery. Here with your siblings learning to soar." Their first attempts at true flight were disasters. Ember would leap from the lowest platform, beat his wings frantically, and crash into the padding within seconds. But each crash taught them something new about wing position, timing, or power generation. Sarah's background in rehabilitative medicine proved crucial. She knew how to analyze failed attempts, identify specific weaknesses, and develop targeted exercises to address them. More importantly, she knew how to maintain hope in the face of repeated failure. "Every crash is data," she reminded Ember after a particularly spectacular failure that left him tangled in safety netting. "We learn from each one and try again." Ember's determination never wavered. Each night he launched himself from that platform with complete faith that eventually something would work. His trust in Sarah's methods was absolute, even when her methods challenged everything dragons believed about flight. The transformation was remarkable to witness. The weak, defeated hatchling was being replaced by a focused, athletic young dragon whose muscles were developing properly for the first time. His coordination improved daily. His confidence grew with each successful glide. But time was running short. Palace rumors indicated that Lord Zephyros was planning his final evaluation of Ember within days. The monastery transport was being arranged. If Ember was going to demonstrate his capabilities, it would have to be soon. The night before the scheduled evaluation, Sarah and Ember made their way to the training grounds for what might be their final session. Both understood the stakes. This wasn't just practice anymore. It was their last chance to prove that the impossible was possible. Sarah had prepared everything carefully. She had studied the flight patterns of successful young dragons, analyzing recordings from the palace archives to understand the precise wing movements that generated sustained lift. She had calculated the minimum speed and power requirements for Ember's body weight. Most importantly, She had prepared a series of exercises to warm up every muscle group Ember would need. "Tonight is different," she told Ember as they went through their preparation routine. "Tonight you don't just glide. Tonight you fly." Ember's response was a determined chirp that Sarah had learned to recognize as his signal that he was ready for anything. They started with the lowest platform, as always. Ember's glides were now perfect, controlled, graceful descents that demonstrated complete mastery of basic principles. They moved to the second platform, then the third. Each glide was longer and more controlled than the attempts just weeks earlier. Finally, they reached the highest platform that Sarah dared to use, nearly 20 feet above the padded floor. From this height, a successful flight would require sustained lift, not just controlled falling. Sarah positioned Ember at the edge of the platform, making final adjustments to his wing position. "Remember everything we've practiced," she said. "Power stroke down and back, recovery stroke up and forward. Feel the air beneath your wings. Trust your instincts, but use what we've learned." Ember looked down at the distant floor, then back at Sarah. In his amber eyes, she saw complete trust and absolute determination. "Go," she whispered. Ember launched himself into space. His wings snapped into perfect position, just as they had practiced thousands of times. The first power stroke generated visible lift. The second power stroke kept him airborne. By the third, he was no longer falling. He was flying. Sarah watched in breathless amazement as Ember completed a full circuit of the training chamber. His flight was not yet graceful. He wobbled, overcorrected, and beat his wings with more force than necessary. But he was undeniably flying under his own power, staying aloft through skill rather than luck. When he finally landed, somewhat ungracefully on the padded floor, both teacher and student were trembling with excitement and exhaustion. "You did it," Sarah whispered, kneeling to embrace the young dragon. "You actually did it." But even as they celebrated this incredible achievement, both knew that their real challenge lay ahead. Ember would need to demonstrate his abilities to his father, and somehow they would need to explain how a supposedly disabled hatchling had suddenly learned to fly. Lord Zephyros arrived at Ember's chamber the next morning, with the formal resignation of a parent about to surrender his greatest disappointment. Chancellor Mordak followed closely, carrying scrolls that would finalize the monastery arrangements. 2 palace guards flanked the entrance, their presence a reminder of the solemnity of this final evaluation. Sarah watched from the servants' corridor through a carefully positioned mirror, her heart racing as she observed the scene. Ember lay on his cushion exactly as he had every morning for months, motionless, apparently weak, giving no indication of the incredible transformation he had undergone. "My son," Zephyros said formally, his voice heavy with barely controlled emotion, "today I make arrangements for your future care. The monastery will provide a peaceful existence, away from the expectations that you cannot meet." Ember's amber eyes tracked his father's movement, but showed no other response. Sarah bit her lip, wondering if the little dragon had lost his nerve, or if he was simply waiting for the right moment to reveal his secret. "The transport will arrive this afternoon," Chancellor Mordak announced, unrolling one of his scrolls. "Brother Talon himself will escort the young heir to ensure his comfort during the journey." It was then that Ember made his move. With a fluid motion that stunned everyone in the room, he rose from his cushion and stood proudly on all 4 legs, his wings spread wide, displaying muscle definition that had been entirely absent weeks earlier. His head lifted high, amber eyes blazing with intelligence and determination. "Impossible," breathed Chancellor Mordak, dropping his scrolls. Lord Zephyros stepped back in shock, his golden eyes wide with disbelief. When did this?" Ember took several confident steps forward, his movements strong and coordinated. Then without warning, he launched himself into the air. His wings beat with perfect rhythm as he soared around the chamber in a graceful circuit, before landing smoothly near his father's feet. The silence that followed was absolute. Lord Zephyros stared at his son as if seeing him for the first time. The guards exchanged bewildered glances. Chancellor Mordak struggled to gather his scattered scrolls with trembling claws. "Ember," Zephyros whispered, using his son's name for the first time since hatching. "How is this possible?" It was then that Ember did something that shocked everyone. He looked directly toward the hidden mirror where Sarah was watching and chirped loudly, as if summoning her presence. Sarah's heart stopped. Ember was revealing not just his abilities, but her involvement. The little dragon was either incredibly brave or incredibly foolish. Either way, there was no hiding now. She emerged from the servants' corridor and approached the chamber entrance. The guards immediately moved to block her path, but Lord Zephyros raised a claw to stop them. "Let her enter," he commanded, his voice filled with confusion and something that might have been hope. Sarah walked into the chamber with as much dignity as she could manage, knowing that her next words might determine not just Ember's future, but her own survival on this world. "My lord," she said, offering the formal bow she had been taught. "I believe I owe you an explanation." Zephyros studied her with an intensity that made her feel like a specimen under examination. "You are the human medical practitioner. What do you know of my son's transformation?" Sarah took a deep breath. "With your permission, my lord, I have been working with Ember for the past 6 weeks. His condition was not permanent disability. It was simply underdevelopment that could be addressed through proper training techniques." "Techniques unknown to dragon healers?" Chancellor Mordak interjected, his tone suggesting that this was impossible. "Not unknown, my lord," Sarah replied carefully. "Simply different. In my profession on Earth, we specialize in helping individuals overcome physical limitations through targeted exercises and gradual strengthening. What your healers saw as permanent weakness, I recognized as treatable developmental delays." She gestured toward Ember, who was now demonstrating a series of precise movements that showcased his newfound coordination. Ember's intelligence was never impaired. His muscles simply needed to be taught how to work properly. His wings required specific strengthening exercises. His balance needed practice and refinement. Lord Zephyros circled his son slowly, observing the confident way Ember moved, the proper development of his wing muscles, the alert intelligence in his eyes. "And you did this, how?" Sarah explained their training regimen, the careful exercises, the gradual progression, the principles of physical therapy adapted for dragon physiology. She described how Ember's determination had driven every breakthrough, how his intelligence had accelerated the learning process once he understood what was possible. Human medical science, Zephyros mused, his tone unreadable, applied to dragon development. "The principles are universal, my lord," Sarah said quietly. "Bodies can be trained to overcome limitations. Muscles can be strengthened. Coordination can be improved. What matters is patience, proper technique, and the will to succeed." Chancellor Mordak was frantically taking notes, clearly struggling to understand how their most advanced healers had missed something that an alien had quickly identified and corrected. "Why the secrecy?" Zephyros demanded. "Why not approach me directly with your theories?" Sarah hesitated, then decided that honesty was her only option. "Because I feared you would not allow a human to presume to treat a member of the royal family. Because dragon society values strength and perfection, and my methods would have seemed like admission that Ember was permanently flawed. Because I believed that results would speak more convincingly than theories." Ember chose that moment to demonstrate his flying ability again, launching himself from the floor and executing a perfect aerial maneuver, before landing gracefully on his father's extended arm. The gesture was clearly intended as a show of affection and trust. For the first time since Sarah had been on Drakmor, she saw genuine emotion in Lord Zephyros's expression. The proud, distant ruler was replaced by a father seeing his son's potential fulfilled. "You saved him," Zephyros said quietly, his voice thick with feelings he rarely allowed himself to show. "You gave my son his birthright." "He saved himself, my lord," Sarah replied. "I simply provided the tools. Ember's courage and determination did the rest." The implications of this revelation rippled through the room. Chancellor Mordak was already calculating how this miraculous recovery would affect the succession, the royal image, the kingdom's future. The guards were witnessing something that would become palace legend. But for Sarah, the most important moment came when Lord Zephyros approached her directly, his massive form towering over her human frame. "Sarah Chen of Earth," he said formally, "you have given me back my son. How does one repay such a debt?" Sarah looked at Ember, who was now confidently exploring his chamber with the joy of a young dragon finally able to move as nature intended. "No debt is owed, my lord. This is why I became a healer, to help others achieve their potential." Lord Zephyros studied her for a long moment. "Perhaps," he said slowly, Our two species have more to learn from each other than either of us realized. The monastery scrolls lay forgotten on the floor. The transport would be cancelled. Ember would remain in the palace, not as a shameful secret, but as the rightful heir whose miraculous recovery would become a symbol of hope and possibility. But Sarah understood that this was just the beginning. Word of Ember's transformation would spread throughout the Dragon Kingdom, raising questions about human capabilities, about the limitations of traditional dragon medicine, about the possibilities that existed when different species shared their knowledge. News of Ember's miraculous recovery spread through the palace like wildfire, then rippled outward through the capital city of Drakmor and beyond. Within hours, the story had been embellished and retold so many times that the truth seemed almost mundane compared to the legends already forming. Some claimed that Sarah possessed magical healing, powers unique to her alien species. Others whispered that she had made a bargain with ancient spirits to grant flight to the grounded prince. The most elaborate stories suggested that humans were actually descendants of a lost dragon bloodline, explaining their ability to understand draconic physiology so completely. Lord Zephyros quickly realized that managing the narrative would be crucial. The revelation that human medical knowledge could accomplish what dragon healers could not was potentially threatening to the established order, but the sight of his son soaring confidently through the palace halls made him willing to embrace any political complications. He convened an emergency session of the Royal Council. Within hours of Ember's demonstration, the ancient chamber filled with the most powerful dragons in the kingdom, military commanders, noble houses, trade guild leaders, and the highest-ranking healers. All had heard rumors, but none were prepared for what they witnessed when Ember flew into the chamber under his own power and landed gracefully beside his father's throne. "Counselors," Lord Zephyros announced, his voice carrying the formal tone reserved for momentous occasions. "You see before you my son, Prince Ember, rightful heir to the throne of Drakmor. 6 weeks ago you witnessed his apparent weakness. Today you see his strength." Elder Counselor Thane, a massive silver dragon whose family had served the crown for generations, struggled to find words. "My lord, this transformation, how is such a thing possible?" Instead of answering immediately, Zephyros gestured for Sarah to enter the chamber. She had been waiting in an anteroom, her human diplomatic credentials hastily retrieved to provide her with some official standing for this unprecedented situation. "This is Sarah Chen, representative of Earth's medical sciences," Zephyros announced. "Through her knowledge and my son's determination, what we deemed impossible has been achieved." The council chamber erupted in discussion. Some counselors demanded explanations of human medical techniques. Others questioned whether this development suggested weaknesses in dragon healing traditions. The most conservative voices worried about the implications of depending on alien knowledge for matters of royal succession. Sarah found herself the center of attention from beings who could have destroyed her with a casual swipe of their claws. But Ember's presence beside her provided confidence. The young dragon had positioned himself protectively near her, making it clear that any threat to his teacher would be met with royal displeasure. Master Healer Koros, the most senior medical authority in the kingdom, approached Sarah with a mixture of professional curiosity and wounded pride. "Young human, explain to us these techniques that accomplished what our entire medical establishment could not." Sarah chose her words carefully, understanding that she was not just explaining medical procedures, but potentially reshaping the relationship between two civilizations. "Honored healer," she began, "your medical knowledge far exceeds mine in most areas. What I offered was simply a different perspective, one focused specifically on overcoming physical limitations through gradual strengthening and training. On Earth we call this physical therapy, and it is a specialized field within our medical sciences." She went on to explain the basic principles, how muscles could be systematically strengthened, how coordination could be improved through practice, how the brain's control over movement could be enhanced through specific exercises. She emphasized that these were not magical solutions, but applications of scientific understanding about how bodies adapt to training. "Are you suggesting," rumbled General Pyraxis, commander of the Dragon Air Force, "that humans possess superior knowledge of flight mechanics?" "Not superior, Honored General," Sarah replied diplomatically. "Different. Dragons understand flight instinctively, which is an enormous advantage. But sometimes, when instinct is not enough, analytical understanding can provide alternative paths to the same goal. Master Healer Koros was taking detailed notes, his professional interest overcoming any initial skepticism. And these techniques, could they be applied to other conditions? Other dragons who have suffered injury or developmental problems? Sarah's heart leaped at the implication. I believe so, honored healer. With proper adaptation to dragon physiology and collaboration with your medical knowledge, many conditions that are currently considered permanent might be improved or even reversed. The political implications of this statement sent another wave of discussion through the council chamber. If human medical techniques could enhance dragon capabilities, it suggested possibilities for cooperation that went far beyond simple diplomatic relations. Lord Zephyros allowed the discussion to continue for several minutes before calling for order. Counselors, we face a choice that will define our kingdom's future. We can view this development as a challenge to our traditions, or we can embrace it as an opportunity for growth. Elder Counselor Thane spoke for many when he asked, "What do you propose, my lord?" "I propose that we establish a new institution within our medical academy, a center for collaborative healing that combines dragon knowledge with human techniques. Sarah Chen will be invited to lead this institution, training both human and dragon healers in these new methods." The chamber fell silent as the counselors absorbed this unprecedented proposal. Creating a formal position for an alien within dragon society was revolutionary enough. Placing her in charge of training dragon healers challenged fundamental assumptions about species hierarchy. Furthermore, Zephyros continued, "I propose that we extend an invitation to Earth for an expanded medical exchange program. If one human healer could achieve such results working alone, imagine what might be possible with full collaboration between our medical establishments." Sarah felt overwhelmed by the scope of what was being proposed. She had come to Drakmor as a minor diplomatic functionary, expecting to treat injured warriors and learn about alien physiology. Instead, she was being offered the opportunity to bridge two civilizations through shared medical knowledge. Ember chose that moment to demonstrate his flying abilities once more, executing a series of aerial maneuvers that showcased both natural dragon grace and the precise control that Sarah's training had provided. His flight was a living symbol of what could be achieved when different approaches to the same challenge were combined. The vote, when it came, was not unanimous but was decisive enough to establish clear support for Lord Zephyros's proposal. The conservatives who opposed it were outnumbered by pragmatists who recognized the potential, benefits, and progressives who welcomed closer ties with Earth. Master Healer Koros was the first to formally welcome Sarah to her new role. "I confess, young human, that I initially doubted your methods. But results speak more loudly than tradition. I would be honored to work with you in developing these collaborative techniques." General Peraxis approached next, his massive form somehow managing to convey both authority and humility. "If your methods can help injured warriors return to flight, then you will have the eternal gratitude of our military forces." As the council session concluded, and the various counselors departed to spread word of the historic decision, Sarah found herself alone with Lord Zephyros and Ember. The young dragon was perched on his father's arm, preening his wings with the confidence of a prince who knew he belonged. "You understand," Zephyros said quietly, "that accepting this position will tie your fate to ours permanently. There will be those who oppose what we are attempting, who see human influence as a threat to dragon purity." Sarah looked at Ember, whose bright eyes reflected complete trust in her abilities and judgment. "I understand, my lord. But some opportunities are too important to refuse regardless of the risks." Zephyros nodded approvingly. "Then let us begin the work of reshaping our worlds together." 6 months later, the Collaborative Healing Academy stood as a testament to what could be achieved when different species combined their knowledge. Built in the shadow of the royal palace, the gleaming white structure incorporated both dragon architectural grandeur and human practical design principles. Sarah stood in the main laboratory, watching as Master Healer Koros guided a young dragon through exercises designed to strengthen damaged wing muscles. The patient, a warrior named Blazeclaw who had been injured in a training accident, moved through the routine with growing confidence. 3 weeks earlier, the military healers had declared his flying career over. Today he was preparing for his first test flight since the injury. "Steady pressure on the upstroke," Sarah instructed, her dragon tongue now fluent after months of intensive practice. "Remember, we're building endurance as well as strength." Koros nodded approvingly as he adjusted BlazeClaw's wing position. The elderly healer had become Sarah's most valuable collaborator. His centuries of experience with dragon physiology perfectly complementing her knowledge of rehabilitative techniques. "The human approach to gradual progression continues to amaze me," Koros confided to Sarah during a brief break. "We dragons have always believed in immediate success or permanent failure. This concept of incremental improvement changes everything." The Academy had grown beyond their wildest initial expectations. Word of Ember's recovery had spread throughout the Dragon Consortium, bringing patients from across the galaxy. Warriors with flight injuries, hatchlings with developmental delays, elderly dragons suffering from age-related mobility issues all came seeking the miracle treatments that combined dragon healing, magic with human scientific methodology. But the Academy's success had also attracted opposition. Conservative factions within Dragon Society viewed the human influence as cultural contamination. They argued that relying on alien knowledge weakened dragon pride and independence. Some had gone so far as to suggest that the Academy represented the first step toward human colonization of Dragon Society. These tensions had erupted into open conflict just 2 weeks earlier, when a group of traditionalist healers had attempted to disrupt one of Sarah's training sessions. Led by an influential noble named Lord Scorch, they had burst into the Academy demanding that all human techniques be abandoned in favor of pure dragon healing methods. The confrontation had been resolved only when Prince Ember himself had arrived to defend the Academy. Now 8 months old and showing the confident bearing expected of a royal heir, Ember had calmly demonstrated his flying abilities before, challenging any of the traditionalists to explain how pure dragon methods would have restored his flight. "Sarah Chen saved my life and gave me my birthright," Ember had declared, his young voice carrying surprising authority. Those who oppose her methods oppose the royal family itself. The challenge had effectively silenced the immediate opposition, but Sarah knew that underlying resentments remained. Building trust between species required more than just medical success. It required patience, diplomacy, and constant proof that collaboration served everyone's interests. The Academy's teaching program had become particularly important in this regard. Rather than simply treating individual patients, Sarah had focused on training dragon healers in human techniques. Each successfully trained dragon healer became an advocate for collaborative methods, spreading knowledge and understanding throughout their professional network. Today's session involved a mixed class of dragon and human students, part of the expanded exchange program that Lord Zephyros had negotiated with Earth. 12 human medical professionals had volunteered for extended assignment on Drakmor, while an equal number of young dragon healers were preparing for study visits to Earth. "The key principle," Sarah explained to the mixed class, "is that healing and strengthening are processes, not events. Traditional dragon healing focuses on immediate magical intervention. Human medicine emphasizes gradual improvement through systematic intervention. Both approaches have value, and both can be enhanced by understanding the other." Dr. James Morrison, one of the human exchange students, raised his hand. "Sarah, I'm still struggling with how to adapt resistance training for beings who can manipulate gravity through will alone. The physics of dragonflight challenges everything I thought I knew about muscle development." Before Sarah could respond, Koros stepped forward with a smile. "Perhaps, young human, that is precisely the point. We each bring knowledge that challenges the other's assumptions. Through this challenge, we discover new possibilities." The collaboration had indeed revealed possibilities that neither species had imagined alone. Dragon healing magic, when combined with human physical therapy techniques, produced results that exceeded what either approach could achieve independently. Human understanding of biomechanics had helped dragons develop more efficient flight patterns and injury prevention strategies. Dragon knowledge of magical healing had shown humans new approaches to tissue, regeneration, and pain management, but perhaps the most significant development had been the emergence of hybrid techniques that belonged fully to neither tradition. These innovations were being developed by the mixed teams of human and dragon researchers who had learned to think beyond the limitations of their individual backgrounds. Prince Ember had become the Academy's unofficial mascot and most enthusiastic supporter. Now fully grown to adolescent size, he spent much of his free time at the Academy, often serving as a demonstration patient for new students. His relationship with Sarah had evolved from patient and therapist to something resembling a partnership in advancing collaborative healing. Methods, Aunt Sarah, he called as he landed gracefully in the Academy's main courtyard. The informal title had emerged naturally as their bond deepened. The Earth transport has arrived with the new medical equipment you requested. Sarah looked up from her current patient, a young dragoness named Sci-Fi, who was recovering from a genetic muscle condition that would have been untreatable under traditional dragon healing methods. Excellent timing, Ember. We'll need those scanners for this afternoon's research session. The new equipment represented another breakthrough in collaboration. Earth's advanced medical imaging technology, adapted for dragon physiology through joint research, allowed healers to monitor muscle and bone development with unprecedented precision. Combined with dragon magical diagnostic techniques, it provided a complete picture of patient health that neither species could achieve alone. As the day progressed, Sarah found herself reflecting on how completely her life had changed since that first secret session with a struggling hatchling. She had come to Drakmore as a temporary exchange student, expecting to learn about alien physiology and perhaps help a few injured warriors. Instead, she had become the architect of an entirely new approach to healing that was transforming two civilizations. The challenges remained significant. Political opposition continued to simmer beneath the surface. Technical difficulties arose regularly as they pushed the boundaries of what was possible. The cultural differences between humans and dragons created constant communication challenges that required careful navigation. But the successes far outweighed the difficulties. Each patient who walked or flew again represented a victory for collaborative approaches over traditional isolation. Each successfully trained healer became a bridge between species. Each breakthrough in hybrid techniques pointed toward a future where the boundaries between human and dragon knowledge became less important than their combined potential. As evening approached and the day's sessions concluded, Sarah stood on the Academy's observation deck watching Prince Ember lead a formation flight of recovered patients. Warriors who had been told they would never fly again soared confidently through complex maneuvers. Young dragons with developmental issues performed aerial dances that showcased both natural grace and learned precision. Master healer Koros joined her on the deck, his ancient eyes bright with satisfaction. "When I first heard of your techniques," he said quietly, "I feared that human methods would diminish dragon traditions. Instead, they have made our traditions stronger by expanding our understanding of what healing can accomplish." Sarah nodded, watching as Ember executed a perfect spiral descent that demonstrated both the natural dragon gift for flight and the precise control that systematic training had provided. "That's what the best collaborations do," she replied. "They don't replace what exists. They reveal new possibilities that neither partner could achieve alone." 5 years had passed since Sarah first entered Ember's chamber with trembling hands and desperate hope. The Collaborative Healing Academy now encompassed 3 buildings and hosted students from dozens of worlds within the Dragon Consortium. What had begun as a secret attempt to help one disabled hatchling had evolved into a revolutionary movement that was reshaping medicine throughout the galaxy. Sarah stood before the Academy's Grand Assembly, addressing representatives from every major civilization within the consortium. Her hair now showed threads of premature gray from years of intense work, but her eyes burned with the same passion that had driven her to help a struggling young dragon so long ago. "Honored delegates," she began, speaking in the formal diplomatic tongue that had become standard for interspecies communication. "When I first arrived on Drakmore, I believed that humans and dragons were fundamentally different. Our biologies, our cultures, our approaches to healing, everything seemed incompatible." Behind her, a massive display screen showed images from the Academy's work. Dragons learning to walk again after catastrophic injuries, humans developing new techniques through exposure to dragon magical healing, hybrid treatments that combined the best of both approaches. What we discovered through Prince Ember's recovery was not that our differences were obstacles to overcome, but resources to be shared. Each species' unique perspective revealed possibilities that neither could see alone. In the audience, Lord Zephyros sat with obvious pride as his son, now crowned Prince Ember, fully grown and bearing the royal seal of succession. Translated, Sarah's words for delegates whose universal translators couldn't capture the subtle emotional undertones of her speech, the assembly had been called to consider a proposal that would expand the Academy's model throughout the consortium. 50 worlds had expressed interest in establishing similar collaborative healing centers, combining their indigenous medical traditions with techniques learned from the Human-Dragon Partnership. The results speak for themselves, Sarah continued, gesturing toward a section of the audience where former patients sat alongside their healers. Warrior Captain Stormwing, declared permanently disabled after a space combat injury, now leads the consortium's elite aerial rescue squadrons. Master Feng, a human surgeon who learned dragon healing magic, has developed techniques that have reduced surgical mortality rates by 60% across 12 worlds. Dr. Feng stood briefly to acknowledge the recognition, his smile bright despite the exhaustion that came from performing 3 impossible operations the previous day. Beside him, Master Healer Koros nodded approvingly. The unlikely partnership between an elderly dragon traditionalist and a young human surgeon had produced some of the Academy's most remarkable innovations. But our greatest success, Sarah said, her voice growing warm with personal affection, sits among you today. Crown Prince Ember, who was once thought too weak to survive, now serves as a living symbol of what becomes possible when we refuse to accept limitations as permanent. Ember rose gracefully from his position beside his father, his massive adult form a stark contrast to the tiny, struggling hatchling Sarah remembered. His flight to the speaker's platform was poetry in motion, every movement precise, powerful and effortlessly controlled, my friends, Ember said, his voice carrying the authority of his royal position, but also the warmth of personal experience. Sarah Chen taught me that strength is not the absence of weakness, but the courage to grow beyond our limitations. This lesson applies not just to individuals, but to entire civilizations. The prince's words carried special weight because everyone present knew his story. The disabled heir who had learned to fly had become a legend throughout the consortium, inspiring countless others to seek help for conditions previously considered hopeless. The Academy model works because it is built on a fundamental truth, Ember continued. No single species, no matter how advanced, possesses all the knowledge needed to solve every challenge. But when we combine our unique perspectives, when we share our different approaches to common problems, we discover capabilities that none of us possessed alone. The formal presentations concluded with a statistical summary that would have seemed impossible 5 years earlier. The Academy network had now treated over 10,000 patients from 47 different species. Recovery rates for previously incurable conditions had improved by an average of 300%. Most significantly, the collaborative techniques were being adapted and improved by local healers, creating a constantly evolving body of knowledge that belonged to no single species. But for Sarah, the most meaningful moment came during the informal reception that followed the formal presentations. A young Andromedian mother approached her with tears in her crystalline eyes, leading a small child whose mobility had been restored through Academy techniques. "My daughter walks because of your work," the mother said in carefully practiced dragon tongue. "Your refusal to accept that she would never stand normally gave us hope when everyone else offered only sympathy." Similar conversations occurred throughout the evening. Parents thanking her for children who could run again, warriors expressing gratitude for careers that had been salvaged, healers sharing stories of techniques they had learned and adapted for their own species' needs. Near the end of the reception, Sarah found herself on a balcony overlooking the Academy's training grounds. Below, a mixed group of students from 6 different species worked together on a complex rehabilitation case. The easy cooperation between beings who would have been strangers just a few years earlier represented everything the Academy had achieved. Ember joined her on the balcony, his massive presence somehow comforting rather than intimidating. Despite his royal status and adult size, he remained the determined young dragon who had trusted a human stranger to help him learn to fly. "Do you ever regret it?" he asked quietly. "Leaving your old life on Earth to build something unprecedented here?" Sarah considered the question seriously. Her decision to accept the permanent position at the Academy had meant abandoning her original career plans, leaving behind family and friends, and committing herself to a future among aliens. There had been moments of doubt, periods of homesickness, and challenges that had seemed insurmountable. "Never," she said finally. "On Earth, I could help individuals overcome their limitations. Here, we're helping entire civilizations overcome theirs." The scale of impact makes every sacrifice worthwhile. Below them, a young dragon successfully completed his first flight since a devastating injury. His triumphant roar echoed across the training grounds, answered by congratulatory calls from students of 5 different species. The sound represented everything the Academy stood for: the refusal to accept defeat, the power of collaboration, and the endless possibilities that emerged when different perspectives united around common goals. Besides, Sarah added with a smile, where else could I have helped raise a prince who was destined to change the galaxy? Ember's rumbling laugh carried genuine affection. The galaxy was changed the moment you decided that a struggling hatchling deserved a chance to fly. Everything since then has just been the natural consequence of that decision. As the evening wound down and delegates began departing for their home worlds, many carried formal agreements to establish academy branches in their own systems. The model that had begun with secret training sessions in a royal chamber was expanding across the galaxy, carrying with it the revolutionary idea that limitations were often simply opportunities for collaboration. The Academy's motto, carved in a dozen languages above its main entrance, had emerged from those early days when Sarah and Ember worked together to achieve the impossible. Strength lies not in perfection, but in the courage to grow beyond what seems possible. For Sarah, watching the delegates depart with their plans and agreements and newly learned techniques, that motto represented both a personal philosophy and a universal truth. She had come to Drakmore believing in the power of rehabilitation to help individuals overcome physical limitations. She was leaving the reception convinced that the same principles could help entire civilizations overcome the limitations of isolation and species-specific thinking. As Ember prepared to fly her back to her quarters in the Academy complex, Sarah took one last look at the training grounds where tomorrow's healers would continue the work of expanding what was possible. The sight filled her with a deep satisfaction that came from knowing that her life's work would continue long after she was gone, carried forward by students who had learned to see limitations, not as permanent barriers but as temporary challenges waiting for the right collaboration to overcome. Them, the disabled hatchling and the determined human who had refused to accept his limitations, had indeed changed the galaxy. But their greatest achievement wasn't any single medical breakthrough or institutional innovation. It was proving that when different species approached challenges together, with patience, respect, and shared determination, there were no limitations that couldn't eventually be overcome.